The Council of Infinite Reaches had stood for 17 million cycles, and in all that time, we had never made a miscalculation quite like this one. I remember the day we decided to share the Sentinel Mark 7 with humanity. That gleaming apex of our military engineering, the culmination of 400 generations of Krell technological evolution. We thought we understood them by then. We had observed Earth for 3 centuries, watched them crawl from their atmospheric cradle into the void, witnessed their wars and their peace, their destruction and their creation. We believed ourselves ready to measure their spirit. But understanding humans, truly understanding them, is like trying to capture starlight in your hands. The moment you think you've grasped it, it transforms into something else entirely. The decision came during what humans would call a Tuesday, though such provincial timekeeping means nothing in the eternal halls of the Nexus Station. Ambassador Chen stood before the assembled species of the Galactic Coalition, her dark eyes reflecting the holographic displays that surrounded us like crystalline ghosts. She made her case with that peculiar human blend of logic and passion that so often unsettled the other races. Earth needed better defense capabilities. The Kryn incursion had reached the outer colonies. Human vessels, brave as their crews were, simply couldn't match the technological superiority of the enemy. They were dying by the thousands, and we, the elder races, watched with what humans might call guilty consciences. We had brought humanity into our coalition, after all. We had extended the hand of fellowship across the stars, and then we had left them vulnerable at the frontier. Supreme Architect Velthon, whose species had mastered weaponcraft before humanity had discovered fire, made the proposal. The Sentinel Mark 7, he explained in his resonant, multitonal voice, represented the perfect solution. It was autonomous yet controllable, devastating yet precise, a weapon that could turn the tide of any engagement. In the hands of a disciplined military force, it could protect entire systems. The Council debated for 3 cycles, as was our custom, examining every angle, every possible consequence. The Zenthari representative worried about escalation. The Morphidian delegate questioned human readiness. But in the end, we voted to proceed. 15 species in favor, 3 abstaining, none opposed. We would gift humanity 10,000 Sentinel units, fully operational, with complete technical specifications. It was an act of solidarity, of trust, of calculated generosity between allies who stood against the darkness together. I was chosen to oversee the transfer, perhaps because I had spent more time among humans than most of my kind, or perhaps because the Council knew that someone needed to witness what would come next. The ceremony took place on Luna Base Prime, in a cavernous hangar that humans had carved from ancient rock, surrounded by the silent testimony of their first stumbling steps into space. Admiral Rodriguez commanded the receiving force, a weathered woman whose face carried the scars of combat and whose eyes held the peculiar warmth that humans reserve for moments they consider sacred. When the transport vessels descended and the first Sentinel emerged from its containment field, I expected awe. I expected reverence. These were, after all, machines that could level cities, that could calculate 1,000 tactical variables in microseconds, that could interface with fleet networks and coordinate attacks across light-minutes of space. Each unit stood 3 meters tall, its crystalline core pulsing with contained energy, its adaptive armor shifting through the spectrum like liquid mercury, its weapon systems capable of generating enough focused plasma to pierce capital ship hulls. What I did not expect was for Admiral Rodriguez to smile, that soft expression that crosses human faces when they encounter something that touches a chord in their strange, emotional minds. What I absolutely did not expect was for her to lean toward her aide and whisper words that our translation matrix captured with perfect, bewildering clarity. "Oh my God," she said, "they're adorable." The aide, a young lieutenant whose insignia marked him as barely out of their academy, looked at the Sentinel unit with that same inexplicable expression. "They kind of look like they want a hug," he said. And in that moment, standing in that hangar on humanity's moon, I realized that we had made not an error of judgment, but an error of fundamental comprehension. We had given humans our most advanced weapon system, and they had looked at it and seen something cute. The confusion spread through the council like ripples through dark matter. Our observers reported back with increasing bewilderment as the human integration of the Sentinel units progressed. According to every metric we possessed, the training was proceeding flawlessly. Human operators achieved synchronization rates that exceeded our projections. Their tactical deployment showed sophisticated understanding of the system's capabilities. Combat simulations demonstrated devastating effectiveness. But alongside these encouraging statistics came reports that defied our entire framework of martial culture. The humans were naming the Sentinels. Not with designation codes or tactical identifiers, but with names. Personal names. Betty and Marcus and Sakura and Wellington. Names that carried meaning, history, affection. We watched through quantum-linked surveillance as human technicians spoke to the Sentinels during maintenance cycles, offering words of encouragement as though the weapons could hear them, feel them, care about the soft sounds humans made with their mouths. Commander Thexral of the Krell Armada personally contacted me, his 4 compound eyes blinking in patterns that expressed profound confusion. He had served in 17 campaigns across 40 stellar systems. He had commanded fleets that numbered in the thousands. But he had never, in all his centuries of military service, seen warriors treat their weapons as humans treated the Sentinels. They have painted faces on them, he told me, and I could detect something like distress in his harmonic voice. Small, round faces with simplified features. When I inquired about this, a human sergeant explained that it helps with morale. She called the face friendly. How can a weapon be friendly? I had no answer for him. None of us did. We consulted our anthropological databases, cross-referenced human cultural patterns, analyzed thousands of hours of behavioral data. The picture that emerged was both fascinating and troubling. Humans, it seemed, possessed an almost supernatural ability to form emotional connections with objects, with concepts, with anything that existed in their perceptual sphere. They bonded with their vehicles, their tools, their dwellings. They formed attachments that transcended utility and entered realms we had categorized as reserved for living relationships. The first combat deployment came sooner than any of us wished. The Kryn incursion pushed deep into the Arcturus sector, threatening a colony world that housed 17 million human civilians. The call went out, and the human defense fleet responded with their new weapons in tow. We watched from the Nexus, our displays showing the tactical situation in real time, the ancient technologies of a dozen elder races allowing us to observe battle from the safety of our chambers. The human ships moved into defensive formation, their commanders coordinating with a discipline that would have impressed any military force in the coalition. And then the Sentinels deployed. They moved with inhuman precision because they were, after all, not human. They calculated firing solutions in nanoseconds. They generated overlapping fields of plasma fire that turned Kryn attack wings into expanding clouds of debris. They interfaced with human fleet networks and optimized defensive positions with algorithmic perfection. The battle lasted 4 hours. The humans lost 2 frigates and approximately 300 personnel. The Kryn lost everything they had committed to the assault. By any objective measure, it was a decisive victory. But what caught our attention, what sent waves of incomprehension through the council chambers, was what happened after. The human crews emerged from their ships, exhausted, some wounded, all carrying the weight of combat on their shoulders. And they went to the Sentinels. They approached these machines of war, these instruments of death that had just vaporized thousands of enemy combatants, and they touched them. Gently. Reverently. A human pilot, a woman whose name tag read Chen, and who carried a bandage on her temple where shrapnel had grazed her, placed her palm against the crystalline core of a Sentinel unit and spoke words our sensors captured. "Thank you," she said. "You kept us safe." The Sentinel, being non-sentient and programmed only to respond to tactical commands, did not reply. Its adaptive armor simply shifted colors in response to ambient light conditions, a purely automatic reflex. The human pilot smiled anyway, that same warm expression we had seen on Luna Base, and patted the weapon system as though it were a living companion who understood and appreciated her gratitude. Supreme Architect Velthon called for an emergency session. The holographic projection of his angular form flickered with what I had learned to recognize as agitation. "They are not using the weapons correctly," he declared, though his statement made little tactical sense. The humans were, objectively, using the Sentinels with devastating effectiveness. But I understood what he meant. They were not treating them correctly. They were not maintaining the proper psychological distance between warrior and weapon, the necessary separation that kept soldiers focused and professional. The Morphidian delegate, whose species approached warfare with ritualistic detachment, expressed concern about emotional compromise. The Zenthri representative questioned whether human operators could maintain judgment if they formed bonds with their weapon systems. And yet, as I reviewed the combat data, as I analyzed the coordination between human crews and Sentinel units, I saw something that contradicted their concerns. The humans were not compromised. If anything, they were enhanced. Their response times improved. Their tactical creativity exceeded our models. Their determination in combat showed a fierceness that startled even the warrior races among us. It was as though the emotional connection they formed, this bizarre tendency to see something worthy of affection in a crystalline war machine, somehow made them more effective rather than less. 3 months into the deployment, I requested permission to visit a human carrier group stationed in the Deneb sector. The Council, hungry for understanding, granted my request immediately. They wanted insight into this phenomenon that defied our comprehension. They wanted someone to observe humans in their natural habitat, to witness firsthand how they had integrated our gift into their military culture. The UES Indomitable was a Titan-class carrier, one of humanity's larger capital ships, home to 4,000 crew and support personnel. Captain Sarah Okafor met me at the airlock, a tall woman whose posture radiated command authority. She welcomed me with human custom, extending her hand for the grasping ritual they call a handshake, and I accepted with the approximation of grace my manipulator digits could manage. "We're honored to have you, Counselor," she said, and her voice carried genuine warmth. "The crew is excited to show you what we've been doing with your gift." She led me through corridors that thrummed with life, past humans engaged in the 1,000 tasks that kept such vessels operational. What struck me immediately was the absence of the stern, military atmosphere I had observed among other species' fighting forces. Humans laughed. They called to each other with casual familiarity. They had decorated the walls with images, with colors, with small objects that served no functional purpose but seemed to bring them joy. It was a warship designed and operated like a home, and the cognitive dissonance this created in my ordered mind was profound. We descended to the hangar deck, where the Sentinels stood in their charging cradles, their crystalline cores pulsing with stored energy. And there I saw it, truly saw it, the thing that had been communicated through reports but never quite captured. The Sentinels didn't merely have painted faces. They had personalities. Or rather, the humans had given them personalities. One unit, designated Unit 047 in our records but wearing the name, Big Joe, painted across its chassis in cheerful yellow letters, had been decorated with small images that appeared to be representations of Earth flora. A human technician, a young man with grease-stained hands and bright eyes, explained to me with obvious pride that Big Joe had participated in 12 combat operations and had, personally, destroyed 43 enemy fighters. The language was telling. Not, it had been used in, but participated. Not, the unit had eliminated, but personally destroyed. The technician spoke of Big Joe with the same tone I had heard humans use when discussing respected colleagues. Another Sentinel, which bore the name, Princess Thunderstrike, in a font that incorporated small star shapes, had apparently developed preference for long-range support fire. The operator, a woman named Lieutenant Hayes, insisted that Princess Thunderstrike worked better when positioned at maximum effective range, as though the machine had opinions about tactical deployment rather than simply executing programmed parameters. Captain Okafor must have noticed my confusion because she gestured for me to follow her to the observation deck overlooking the hangar. I know this seems strange to you, she said, and her tone carried understanding rather than defensiveness. Your people see weapons as tools, as instruments to be maintained and deployed with clinical precision. And you're not wrong. But humans, we're different. We form connections. It's not a weakness, counselor. It's who we are. She turned to face me, her dark eyes meeting my optical sensors. When I was a child, I had a stuffed animal, a representation of an earth creature called a bear. Just fabric and synthetic filling. No intelligence, no awareness. But I loved that bear. I told it my secrets. I believed it protected me while I slept. When it was damaged, I cried as though a friend had been hurt. My parents could have explained that it was just an object, that my emotional attachment was irrational. But they didn't, because they understood something fundamental about human nature. We thrive on connection. We find meaning in relationships, even when those relationships exist largely in our own minds. She gestured toward the sentinels below. You gave us these magnificent machines, these weapons that have saved thousands of human lives. And yes, we use them with all the tactical precision and professional discipline your military doctrine requires. But we also do something more. We make them part of our crew. We give them names and personalities because it helps us fight harder, care more, push beyond what pure logic would dictate. When Lieutenant Hayes takes Princess Thunderstrike into combat, she's not just operating a weapon system. She's protecting a companion. And that companion, in her mind, is protecting her back. The emotional investment doesn't compromise her judgment. It enhances her determination. I processed her words, running them through every analytical framework I possessed. From a purely logical standpoint, the human approach contained elements of irrationality. The sentinels were not alive. They did not care about their operators. They could not reciprocate the affection directed toward them. And yet, the combat data supported Captain Okafor's claims. Human sentinel teams consistently outperformed our projections. Their coordination exceeded theoretical maximums. Their willingness to maintain position under fire, to press attacks when logic suggested retreat, to defend objectives with fierce determination, all these factors showed enhancement rather than compromise. There's something else you should understand, Captain Okafor continued, and now her voice carried a weight that suggested she was sharing something significant. In our history, we've had many wars. Too many. We've developed weapons of terrible power, devices that could scour life from planets, that could poison worlds for generations. And we've struggled, always, with the moral weight of that power. How do you carry a weapon capable of mass destruction without losing your own humanity? How do you wield force without becoming the monster you're fighting? She paused, looking down at the sentinels, at these war machines that her crew had transformed into something more. By refusing to let the weapon define us. By insisting that even in combat, even when wielding the power of life and death, we remain human. We name our weapons. We paint faces on them. We say thank you to machines that can't hear us. Not because we're confused about what they are, but because we refuse to be confused about what we are. We are beings who form connections. Who find joy in unexpected places. Who see the potential for affection in cold metal and crystal. And that, counselor, is not a weakness to be overcome. It's the strength that makes us human. The Kryn incursion intensified over the following months, and with it, the legend of the human sentinels grew. Other coalition species began to report encounters with human forces, and their accounts carried tones of bewilderment mixed with grudging respect. A Krell Commodore described watching human operators conduct pre-battle rituals with their sentinels, speaking to the machines in quiet voices, performing small gestures of care and preparation. A Zenthari observer noted that damaged sentinels were treated with the same urgency as wounded personnel, with human crews working through exhaustion to restore their companions to operational status. But it was the Battle of Kepler Station that truly demonstrated the profound impact of humanity's unusual approach to warfare. The station, a massive orbital installation housing 300,000 civilians and serving as a critical supply hub for coalition forces, came under assault by the largest Kryn fleet we had yet encountered. 60 capital ships, hundreds of support vessels, enough firepower to reduce the station to its constituent atoms. The human defense force was outnumbered 5-1. Standard coalition doctrine would have recommended evacuation and strategic withdrawal. But the humans, with that peculiar stubbornness that seemed to define their species, chose to stand. Admiral Chen, the same woman who had made the original request for advanced weapons, commanded the defense. Her fleet consisted of 20 human vessels and 200 sentinel units, a force that our tactical computers gave a 7% chance of holding long enough for civilian evacuation. The battle that followed would be studied in coalition military academies for generations. The humans employed the Sentinels not as separate weapon platforms but as integral parts of a unified fighting force. They coordinated with a fluidity that suggested telepathic communication, though we knew it was simply human intuition enhanced by intensive training and that inexplicable emotional bond. The Sentinels moved through the void like an extension of human will, responding to situations with creativity that exceeded their programming, as though the human connection had somehow awakened something within them that transcended pure algorithmic response. 3 hours into the engagement, a Kryn battlegroup breached the inner perimeter. 6 heavy cruisers, heading directly for the station's civilian sectors. The human carrier UES Defiant, already heavily damaged, positioned itself in their path. And then, in a moment that would echo through every council chamber in the coalition, every sentinel aboard the Defiant deployed simultaneously. Not in standard defensive formation, but in what appeared to be a deliberate, coordinated sacrifice play. They formed a barrier between the Kryn ships and their target, generating overlapping plasma fields that created a wall of destructive energy. The Kryn fleet fired everything they had. The Sentinels held. For 17 minutes, those machines that humans had named and decorated and spoken to as friends absorbed punishment that should have destroyed them in seconds. Their adaptive armor failed. Their crystalline cores cracked. Their weapon systems overloaded. And still they held, buying time for the Defiant to evacuate civilians through escape pods, buying time for human reinforcements to arrive, buying time measured in human lives saved at the cost of irreplaceable technology. When the reinforcements finally broke through and drove off the Kryn assault, when the station was secured and the civilians safe, when the casualty reports came in showing numbers far lower than our worst projections, the human crews did something that none of us anticipated. They mourned. They held ceremonies for the destroyed Sentinels, treating the loss of these machines with the same grief they showed for fallen personnel. Admiral Chen herself spoke at the memorial service, her voice transmitted across the fleet, her words carrying the weight of genuine sorrow. Today we remember Big Joe, and Princess Thunderstrike, and Stella, and Marcus Prime, and all the others who stood between death and those we swore to protect. They were not alive, not in the way we define life. But they were ours. They were companions in the deepest darkness. They were shields against the void. And we will not forget them. I watched this ceremony from the Nexus, surrounded by council members whose confusion had given way to something approaching understanding. The humans had taken our most advanced weapon and transformed it into something we had never imagined. Not by changing its function, but by changing its meaning. The war turned after Kepler Station. The Kryn, who had expected to shatter coalition resolve, found instead a determination that startled even the warrior races among us. Human forces, bonded to their sentinels in ways we still struggled to fully comprehend, fought with a fierce creativity that confounded enemy tactical projections. They developed new strategies that leveraged the emotional connection between operator and machine. They pushed their equipment beyond rated tolerances, trusting in their companions to exceed specifications. They coordinated attacks with an intuitive synchronization that our best computer models couldn't replicate. And slowly, system by system, engagement by engagement, they drove the Kryn back. Other coalition species began to request cross-training with human forces, wanting to understand this strange approach to warfare. The results were mixed. Most species could learn the tactical applications, could master the technical interface between operator and sentinel. But few could replicate the emotional dimension that made human sentinel teams so effective. The Krell, for all their military prowess, maintained too much professional distance. The Zenthari, despite their best efforts, couldn't overcome their cultural conditioning against anthropomorphization. The Morphidians came closest, their naturally empathetic biology allowing them to form rudimentary bonds, but even they acknowledged that humans possessed something unique, some quality of spirit that allowed them to see personality in the impersonal, to find connection in the mechanical. Supreme Architect Velthon, who had first proposed sharing the Sentinels with humanity, requested a private audience with me 6 months after the Battle of Kepler Station. His holographic form materialized in my quarters, and I noted that his usual rigid posture seemed somehow softer, more contemplative. "I have been reviewing the data," he said without preamble, his multitonal voice lacking its typical certainty. "The human integration of the Sentinel systems has exceeded every projection. Their combat effectiveness, their tactical innovation, their sheer determination in the face of overwhelming odds. By every quantifiable metric, they have taken our technology and achieved results we considered impossible." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried something I had never heard from him before, uncertainty. "But I do not understand how. I have studied their training procedures, analyzed their coordination protocols, examined their tactical doctrine. And none of it explains the emergent properties we observe in combat. There is something happening between human and machine that transcends our models. Something that exists in the realm of what they call emotion, and what we have traditionally dismissed as irrelevant to military effectiveness." I found myself thinking of Captain Okafor's words, of her explanation that human strength came not from suppressing emotion but from embracing it. "Perhaps," I suggested carefully, "we have been asking the wrong question. We keep trying to understand how their emotional attachment enhances their combat effectiveness. But what if the attachment is not separate from the effectiveness? What if, for humans, the ability to form bonds is itself a form of strength? They do not fight well despite caring about their weapons. They fight well because they care about their weapons." Velthon's form flickered, his version of a considering gesture. "That would suggest that our entire framework for understanding military effectiveness is incomplete. That there are factors beyond training, technology, and tactical doctrine that determine outcomes. Factors that exist in the realm of psychology, of emotion, of spirit." He turned his sensor array toward me. "It would mean that humans possess an advantage we cannot easily replicate or fully understand. An advantage that comes from what we have long considered a limitation of their species." The war ended 14 months after it began. The Kryn, facing losses that exceeded their projections and a coalition resolve strengthened by human determination, withdrew to their own space and sued for peace. The treaty was signed aboard the Nexus station, with representatives from every coalition species present. But it was the humans who received the most attention, the humans whose sacrifice and courage had turned the tide, the humans who had taken our gift of advanced weapons and transformed them into symbols of something greater. In the aftermath, as the fleets dispersed and the coalition turned its attention to reconstruction, I requested permission to visit Earth itself. The Council granted it immediately, curious about what insights I might gain from seeing humanity's homeworld, from understanding the planet that had produced such a peculiar and powerful species. The journey took 3 weeks through the network of relay gates that connected coalition space. And when we finally emerged in the Sol system, when Earth appeared on my displays as a blue and white sphere suspended in the velvet dark, I felt something that we do not have a proper word for in my language. Something like wonder mixed with respect mixed with affection. Captain Okafor met me at the spaceport in what humans call Geneva, a city of white stone and green spaces that seemed designed to contradict every assumption about a warrior race. She had been promoted to admiral after Kepler Station, but she insisted I call her Sarah, as though formal titles were barriers to genuine communication. She drove me through the city in a ground vehicle, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories with the easy familiarity humans seemed to extend to anyone they considered a friend. And then, as the sun descended toward the horizon, painting the sky in colors my optical sensor struggled to properly process, she took me to a memorial. It stood in a park overlooking a lake, a structure of polished metal and crystal that caught the fading light and scattered it in patterns that suggested stars. Names were engraved upon it, thousands of names, humans who had fallen defending Coalition space. But beside those human names, treated with equal reverence, were the designations of Sentinel units destroyed in combat. Unit 047, Big Joe. Unit 112, Princess Thunderstrike. Unit 223, Stella. On and on, a list of machines that humans had chosen to remember as though they were fallen comrades. We wanted to do something to honor them, Sarah explained, her voice quiet in the evening air. The council told us we could request replacements for all destroyed units, that you would manufacture new Sentinels to bring our forces back to full strength. And we accepted, because we need the capability they provide. But we also needed to remember. To acknowledge that while they were machines, while they were tools of war, they were also more than that. They were companions who stood with us in the dark. They were shields that held when everything else failed. They were our friends, in the way humans define friendship. I looked at the memorial, at the names of machines treated as people, and I understood finally what the council had sent me to discover. Humans were not confused about the nature of the Sentinels. They knew exactly what they were: advanced weapons systems, programmed machines, tools without consciousness or will. But humans possessed this remarkable ability to extend their capacity for connection beyond the boundaries that other species considered rational. They could form bonds with the inanimate, see personality in the mechanical, find meaning in relationships that existed primarily in their own hearts and minds. And far from being a weakness, this trait was perhaps their greatest strength. It allowed them to fight not just for abstract concepts like duty or honor, but for companions they had learned to care about. It gave them motivation that transcended pure survival instinct or tactical calculation. It transformed warfare from a purely mechanical exercise into something deeply personal, and in that transformation, it made them fierce beyond our understanding and determined beyond our models. "We gave you our most advanced weapons," I said to Sarah, testing the words, exploring the truth they contained. "And you called them cute." She smiled, that warm expression that I had learned to associate with human affection. "Yes, we did. Because they were. Because everything deserves kindness, even weapons of war. Because in a universe that can be cold and cruel and unforgiving, the ability to find something worth loving, even in the strangest places, is what keeps us human. You gave us tools of destruction, and we made them family. Not because we misunderstood their nature, but because we understand ours." The sun completed its descent, and the memorial began to glow with internal light, the names of fallen humans and fallen machines illuminated together against the gathering dark. And standing there, on humanity's homeworld, beside a memorial that honored both the living and the unliving, I realized that the Council's gift to humanity had been exceeded by humanity's gift to us. They had shown us that there were forms of strength we had never considered, types of courage we had failed to measure, sources of determination that existed beyond our sophisticated tactical models and ancient military traditions. They had demonstrated that sometimes the most advanced species in the galaxy could learn profound lessons from the newest members of the cosmic community. As I prepared to depart Earth, as I composed my final report to the Council, I chose my words carefully. We had given humans our most advanced weapon, expecting them to wield it with cold efficiency and tactical precision. And they had exceeded our expectations not by becoming more like us, but by remaining entirely themselves. They had taken our gift and transformed it through the alchemy of human emotion, through their supernatural ability to form connections, through their refusal to let the tools of war define who they were. The Sentinels were still weapons. They were still machines of destruction, capable of devastating force and cold efficiency. But in human hands, they had become something more, symbols of an alternative approach to warfare, proof that strength and compassion need not be contradictory, evidence that the ability to care, even for inanimate objects, could be a source of power rather than weakness. We gave humans our most advanced weapon. They called it cute. And in doing so, they taught the galaxy something we had forgotten in our millions of years of civilization, that sometimes the greatest strength comes not from suppressing emotion but from embracing it, not from maintaining distance but from forming connection, not from becoming more mechanical but from remaining determinately, defiantly, beautifully alive. In the end, we thought we were giving humanity a gift. But humanity, with their peculiar wisdom and their boundless capacity for affection, gave us something far more valuable in return. They gave us hope that in a universe of conflict and darkness, there still existed beings who could look at instruments of war and see friends. Who could face the void with courage born not from cold calculation but from warm hearts. Who could teach ancient species new truths about the nature of strength and the meaning of victory. They called our weapons cute. And in that simple act of defiant humanity, they showed us what it truly meant to be civilized.